It's finally here. Starrcast on FITE is just days away, and today is your very last chance to enter the ultimate all-in giveaway. You could win 2 front row tickets to All In, plus platinum bands to all the stage shows at Starrcast, an eat and greet every single day, every official meet and greet, and as if that wasn't enough, wrestling travels flying you to Chicago, 2 round-trip tickets from anywhere in the world, and 3 nights in a hotel suite, VIP access to the after party. It's everything you need to make this the ultimate wrestling weekend. And all you've got to do is go pre-order FITE. That's right. Starrcast on FITE is happening right now. It's FITE.tv/Starrcast. And you can pre-order for just $99. And don't forget, you get a $20 credit whenever you place that order. Those credits can be used towards any future FITE purchase. Don't miss out. The contest ends tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern. We're going to have that drawing tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern. Don't you dare miss it. Go pick up Starrcast on FITE right now. There's more than 20 live shows, more than 40 hours of content. This is the ultimate wrestling weekend. Thursday night kicks off with the Monday Night War debate. Eric Bischoff on one side, Bruce Pritchard on the other, and I'm in the middle. And don't forget the death of WCW. R.D. Reynolds is going toe-to-toe, defending the death of WCW book to Eric Bischoff himself. Kevin Sullivan will be there. J.J. Dillon will be there. You don't want to miss it. This could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and you can enjoy it all from the comfort of your own home, both live and on demand for just $99, plus a $20 FITE credit at FITE.tv/Starrcast. That's FITE.tv/Starrcast. And don't forget, there's 2 R's in Starrcast, but 1 low price. FITE.tv/Starrcast. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. Eric, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm feeling better. I finally got rid of that cough. I'm not hacking and gagging and coughing up my lungs, so I'm feeling really good about this show.
I'm excited about this one, man. Not only are you back in action, but we've got Sting's 1996, one of the most important stories in WCW history, at least during your run, when we go from the cool, colorful Sting to the more dark, black and white, jaded Sting, the Crow Sting, if you will. And I'm looking forward to this. If you haven't already, go check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/83 weeks. We've got a couple of pieces of bonus content coming to you this week. And I guess it's worth mentioning, this weekend it's finally here. Starrcast on FITE. We're kicking the festivities off. And Eric, I don't even know that you know this, but your Monday Night War debate just got a little more interesting. Of course, you can tune in on FITE TV at FITE.tv/Starrcast, excuse me. But you've got Bruce Pritchard on one side, you've got you on the other side, but FITE has selected a moderator. Are you ready for this?
And I didn't get to vote? What happened to my creative control? For God's sake, Conrad, what did I get myself into here? Who is it?
It's me.
I can't think of anybody better, honestly. All kidding aside, you do your research, you know your shit, and I really couldn't think of anybody better.
Well, that's nice of you to say. I hope that you feel that way afterwards. What's funny is I was telling FITE, I was like, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want this, just to be all about me. I want to find somebody else. And they came around and they were like, listen, we're sorry, but you got to do it. And I was like, well, I think Bruce will be okay with it. Let me float it by Eric, see what Eric thinks. So just sprung it on you. So I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, thanks for floating it by me after the fact.
Yeah,
nicely done.
You're welcome.
Everybody's agreed to it. Other than you, the only person I think that could have done a job almost as good as you is, probably JBL, because JBL's, he sees both sides of the coin pretty well. But I think you'll do a fine job, and, we'll see what happens.
We will indeed. And we hope you will come see what happens when we're coming to Baltimore and Nashville. You can check out our tickets right now. They're on sale now, man, at ericandconrad.com and 83weekslive.com. So check those out. But let's get right into it. We're going to talk about Sting in 1996. And I guess we should start at the beginning. Sting has sort of been called the franchise of WCW because even when other guys, even like Ric Flair, would leave and go to the WWF, Sting was there the whole time. And he was almost like WCW's answer to Hulk Hogan, the white meat babyface. But then Hogan comes to town in 1994, and then so does Randy Savage. And that seems to present a unique set of challenges for Sting because he's no longer the top babyface. So the top guy, but not necessarily the face of the company anymore. Is that fair to say?
Sure it is. It's accurate.
So let's talk about what we're doing as we sort of wind up 95 and cruise on into 96. Sting is a part of World Championship Wrestling's World Cup of Wrestling. It's a 7-match series where you've got 7 wrestlers or wrestlers from New Japan and WCW all competing. And ultimately Sting beats Sasaki in the 7th and deciding match to win it for WCW. This New Japan relationship is something that I don't think really gets talked about enough because of course everybody is talking about New Japan right now. They're sort of in vogue. What do you remember about this World Cup of Wrestling, this 7-match series?
Well, I mean, this really was the height of our relationship with New Japan, I think. Certainly it extended into 97 and 98. But this is when it really kind of reached its peak. And going back to what you said earlier about, Sting was the franchise and then Hulk came in and Randy came in. I think it's worth noting before we go too far that I think that's one of the things that, at least in my mind, particularly now looking back, I may not have appreciated it as much then, in the moment during the time as I do now. But in thinking about, this episode and thinking a lot about Sting and, the things I admire about him, the challenges we had with him and all that, one of the things that, stands out to me so much is that he was the ultimate team player. He was one of the few guys that really was completely supportive of bringing. He wasn't supportive. He was excited that Hulk Hogan was coming to WCW. He was excited that Randy Savage was coming into WCW. He was so apolitical in that regard in an era where everybody was worried about their spot or all of a sudden the spotlight, going from them to somebody else and what that meant to them and their future. Sting broke the mold in that regard. He just never had any of that. He just always so supportive and like I said, not just supportive, but excited about the prospect. Cause I think he was mature enough and confident enough, more confident than anything, to know that all it meant to him was greater opportunity. Having great matches with Hulk Hogan is a great opportunity for Sting, or was. Having great matches with the Macho Man Randy Savage was a great opportunity for Sting. He was one of those wrestlers that was smart enough to realize it wasn't a zero-sum game and that, bigger names, bigger spotlight, bigger opportunities meant, better opportunities for everyone. And I just want to make that really clear going into this podcast, that was the one, I think, super admirable quality about Steve compared to almost everybody else. Never had a bad word to say about anybody, particularly, the bigger names coming in. Add Roddy Piper to that list as well. Very supportive of all that. So going back to your original question, the World Cup of Wrestling was just not just another, I don't mean to minimize it, but it was at the height, as I said, of the New Japan Pro Wrestling relationship. And it was another effort that we were making to be viewed as an international company, not just, a powerful domestic wrestling company, but we wanted to be looked at as the most powerful wrestling company in the world. And the only way to do that is to, play on an international level. And that's what the New Japan relationship was really all about.
Here domestically, he's kicking the year off with his buddy Lex Luger as his tag team partner, and they're defeating the Super Assassins, which is really just the Powers of Pain, Warlord and Barbarian. The following week, he picks up a win over DDP, and then around the middle of the month, he challenges Ric Flair for the world title. We've got Jimmy Hart and Luger, and they're sort of struggling to get the megaphone in the corner, and all of a sudden, Sting hits Rick with the Stinger Splash in the same corner. And Lex either accidentally or on purpose hit Sting with it. This allows Rick to put Sting in the figure 4, and Sting is pinned here. And this is a pretty interesting storyline. Sting has always been the babyface up until this point, but Lex has teetered back and forth between being the good guy and the bad guy. But they remained friends and they were teaming often here. What's the story you're trying to tell with Sting and Lex Luger? And behind the scenes, how are they getting along at this time?
Well, they're getting along great. They were, best of friends. They were business partners. I think a lot of people know it, but maybe some don't. They owned a gym called Main Event Fitness together in Atlanta. So they not only worked together in WCW, but they were business partners as well. And from what I saw and what I knew, probably the best of friends. So they got along together really well. As far as the story we were trying to tell, I think it was obviously we wanted to tell the Sting Flair story, but we wanted to lay some groundwork so that we could pivot to or include Lex in that story if need be.
I guess we should mention here that the next week we see Sting and Lex Luger actually beat Harlem Heat to win the World Tag Team titles. And despite Sting being in the company like 8 years, this is really his first run with the World Tag Team titles. And that makes him, I guess you might call it, the first WCW Grand Slam champion. Maybe he'd been a world champion, a US champion, a TV champion, and now a tag champ. But in this match where they get the win, Jimmy Hart hands Lex Luger some brass knuckles that he uses on Booker T. And of course, Sting's not looking when that happens. It's sort of an interesting little storyline, an interesting twist. And you guys are switching Sting's look up a little bit here as well. I know people are anxious for us to talk about the Crow, but that happens later in the year. For years and years, Sting had been the blonde, flat top surfer dude, but now he's starting to grow his hair out a little bit, and it's his natural color, the darker color. Is that a WCW decision? Is that a Sting decision?
That was a Sting decision that, I was supportive of. And I'm not a wrestler. I wasn't a wrestler. I guess I was a character to a degree, but as a character and a performer, you want to keep your act fresh. You don't want to get so locked into a character that never changes that it becomes stale. And I think any character is looking for ways to kind of evolve, whether it's in their promos, whether it's in their ring attire, their look and so forth. And I think because of the NWO, because of the evolution of the way we were telling stories, the type of action that was taking place in the ring, so much backstage stuff going on, the reality that we were, I think probably more the reality that we were integrating into our stories, at least some of them, if not all of them. I think Sting was feeling the pressure to kind of evolve a little bit with the company and the new way we were presenting things. And I think that was his way of kind of evolving as a character a little bit. And, something that I can relate to is it gets tiresome, to dye your hair all the time. It's one of the reasons why I couldn't wait, to get into a match where I had to shave my head so I could just quit painting my hair. Every week or every 10 days. So I think that was part of it with Steve as well. I think it was a combination of wanting to change up his look and evolve, and just, you got really tired of, peroxide in that hair every week.
Storyline wise, the guys are going to find themselves being challenged by the Road Warriors, and Lex says he doesn't want to defend the belt against the Warriors, but Sting's agreeing. And Lex is saying at first he doesn't want to re-injure Animal so soon. And he also says they haven't been around in years. So American Males and State Patrol and the Harlem Heat, they all deserve title shots first. So you see sort of where the story is going. Let's fast forward to the February 5th Nitro. We've got an interesting match here, and it's interesting because it's at the Lakeland Civic Center, and the fucking power goes out for several minutes during the match. And you would sort of joke on air later that maybe the WWF had something to do with this, but we've never talked about what really happened. How did the power go out?
It was just a power surge. I knew that. I knew that, 5 or 6 days after the fact, once we heard from the building and they did their own investigation and all that, but it was a power surge. It's not uncommon in Florida, to have heavy rains and thunderstorms, and evidently that was the case. And there was just a power surge, and it jammed us up. And I did blame it on WWE, and I think they bitched about it pretty heavily in the lawsuit. They pointed that out. Yeah. That I was defaming them and accusing them of things they didn't do, and further damaging the image or attempting to the WWF and all that kind of horse shit. So yeah, they took it very seriously, but it was a joke.
Chat me up about the Road Warriors. They're coming back into the company here. Of course, 10 years before this, they were the biggest act around. When they come back here though, how are they to deal with? Were they cool with, contracts and finishes? You know, the rumor and innuendo is they could be difficult to deal with at times.
Hawk a little more so than Animal, but they were both. I get along with both of them pretty well. They were, yeah. You know, how do you judge it? On a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is really super easy to get along with, I would say they were a 7 or an 8 every once in a while. Look, most of the guys, when they did have an issue, and I think the Road Warriors probably as much as anybody would fit into this kind of classification or category, is they just had to understand it. You know, if we're going to do this, if you're asking us to do this, okay, but why? What's the logic behind it? What's the story? What's our motivation? And where's it going? Because nobody wants to go out and just blindly take direction without knowing at least that there was some thought given to it. And the more successful guys were, the more experience they had working in different companies and in different situations with different, writers or producers or bookers, if you want to call them that, the more calculated they were and the more they wanted to understand. But understanding and bitching are two different things. So I never really had an issue explaining why. I preferred to explain why because it helped explain the story and might possibly better explain how the match could be laid out to better fit a story if the talent really understood the how and the why of it. So I never took them questioning or having an issue with a particular aspect of a finish or a matchup, as long as it was done constructively. And the Road Warriors did it constructively. I mean, they were Minneapolis guys. I didn't work with them in the AWA. They were gone before I got there, but again, they hung out. We had so many mutual friends. So it was a little bit of a different relationship. Again, I don't want to paint the picture that we were buddies because we weren't. But, Rick Rude, Kurt Hennig, they came up in the AWA just like I did. We just knew so many of the same friends, John Nord, Wayne Bloom, Mike Enos. We were all kind of in the same neighborhood, so to speak. So there was a little bit of a different relationship as a result of that.
Let's talk about SuperBrawl. This is an interesting show because you've got Sting and Lex working 2 tag matches here, once against the Harlem Heat with the idea that the winners are going to face the Road Warriors. So Sting and Lex get a win there, and then they go on to do a double count out with the Road Warriors in about 14 minutes. And Meltzer just murdered that match. He says, the Warriors, in the guise of wanting the titles, wrestled scientifically, which needless to say is not their forte. Actually, I can't figure out what exactly is their forte. Since they're legends of the 80s, the crowd is really into them when they come out, but their matches stink. All kinds of missed moves, capped off with a horrible finish. -1 star. Do you remember this stinker?
I do not. Not going to lie. I'd have to go back and watch it.
Sure.
I can understand it based on, Meltzer's reporting of it. If they wrestled a match that was a more of a Japanese style match or a technical style match, wasn't their forte. I'll take a little bit of an exception to what, Meltzer said. They were known for being hard hitting, big spot kind of guys, power spot kind of guys, but, they weren't, single leg takedown type guys. They're not going to be doing, back suplexes and things like that. So if they tried to do that, I can understand why the audience didn't like it, including Dave.
Well, if you're looking for some big spots and some hard hitting, maybe you need to go to bluechew.com.
Oh, I knew you were going there. I thought, wow, that was a good setup for a Blue Chew spot right there.
It really is. Let's Road Warrior up your performance at the household. Let's take it to another level. You can, snack on danger and dine on death. Well, how about let's do a little chewable action here, because these things have the same active ingredients as both Viagra and Cialis, so they work, and they're chewable, which means they're faster. You can take them anytime, day or night, even on a full stomach. And maybe best of all, it's cheaper than those other two and without the pesky doctor's visit. You don't have to wait awkwardly in a pharmacy line. This stuff is going to show up discreetly in its own packaging. Check it out right now and use our promo code. It's bluechew.com, BLUECHEW.com, and use our promo code 83weeks. You're going to get your first shipment for free. Just pay that $5 shipping. And I feel like I should mention, Eric, the official after party at Starrcast is sponsored by Blue Chew. How about that?
Well, isn't that after party going to be fun? The Chew World Order will be out in force. All the women coming to Starrcast are going to know that everybody there they're coming to a party that's sponsored by Blue Chew. Is that going to be a night? Is that going to be memorable or what? We're going to be talking about that. We're going to have fans call in and tell us about their favorite Blue Chew moment in order to get a Chew World Order t-shirt. I think that's a good idea.
I love that idea. And if it's time somebody at your house was serving some hard times, go pick it up right now. BlueChew.com. Use that promo code 83weeks. I'm telling you, this stuff works. I have had performers from every locker room that you've heard of either text me or DM me and ask, hey man, what's going on with that Blue Chew? The boys are into it and you will be too. And you got to check out the official after party at Starrcast. Allegedly, according to the rumor and innuendo, they're even going to have some ladies in blue dresses. Can't believe that's a real thing. Check it out right now. BlueChew.com. Use that promo code 83weeks. It's the real deal. You can listen to some of the archived episodes. It sounds like penthouse letters, but it's really just Eric chronicling his, Roll Tide.
Well, I'll tell you, and here's the other thing. You know what's interesting? When I first got into the wrestling business back in 87, 88, 89, when I first started, hanging around the locker room a little bit, when I was doing interviews backstage, after I got smartened up just a bit, I'd walk back there and all you could smell was hot stuff. And I don't know if you remember what that stuff was or if you've ever been around it, but it was like this lotion the guys would put all over their body because it would bring the blood to closer to the surface of the skin. So that if they didn't have a tan, for example, it'd put some color in the skin. And it was like baby oil, so they were shiny and it, defined their muscles a little bit more and all that kind of happy horse shit. But the stuff stunk to high heaven. I mean, you'd walk back to do this, do an interview or something back there, and you'd get hit with this stuff, and you'd get home, and you'd smell yourself in a car, and you would just, you'd be carrying around the smell of hot stuff just from being within 4 foot of somebody with it on. So Blue Chew, no smell, no fuss, no muss. It just works, and you don't stink.
Get your gimmick going. Go to BlueChew.com. Use that promo code 83weeks. Here's somebody who had a gimmick. On February 14th, Sting and Lex Luger beat the Public Enemy. Of course, most people, myself included, really associate the Public Enemy with ECW, but they got a lot more eyeballs in WCW. Chat me up here about signing the Public Enemy, because that doesn't seem like an Eric Bischoff signing.
No, it wasn't. But again, I wasn't the only one. I mean, I was signing people. I was approving those acquisitions, if you will. But, Terry Taylor, Kevin Sullivan, Mike Graham from time to time, Greg Gagne from time to time, other people would look at talent and make the suggestion. And if there was if it was a consensus opinion, if everybody felt strongly about it, and there was room in the budget and it made sense, we'd bring them in. And Public Enemy was one of those people. I didn't, I know this always is controversial and people are just never going to believe what I have to say. And, I don't really give two shits. But in 96, ECW didn't have national television. They weren't on TNN. They were on at 2:00 in the fucking morning on a television station that, nobody ever watched anyway, even in prime time. And it just wasn't available to me. So there was a lot of talent like Public Enemy and others that I didn't even know who they were till they got to WCW. And Public Enemy was one of those tag teams. But they got there and they were easy to work with. I got along with them pretty well. They worked really hard. They were easy to work with. They didn't bring a lot of baggage with them necessarily, other than drug habits. But beyond that, they were relatively easy to work with.
Not too long after this, we see Sting putting the Giant over on a bunch of house shows. And then primetime wrestling hits. We've got Sting and Luger again against the Nasty Boys, and the Nasty Boys are actually becoming more and more heels here. And we're sort of flip flopping back and forth with the way you guys are using Sting. As I said, he's mostly a tag on television, but he's doing a lot of singles on house shows. But then there is the February 26th Nitro where we see Sting beat Big Bubba Rogers. And that sets up a little bit of an interview where Sting and Lex finally have an agreement with the Road Warriors to do a Chicago street fight at the Uncensored pay-per-view. Let's talk a little bit about the Uncensored show that I'm sure we're going to cover long form sometime. Chat me up. What do you remember? March 24th, Tupelo, Mississippi, 9,000 fans here, roughly 100 shy of capacity. And the match that seems like it lasts forever is Sting and Booker T taking on the Road Warriors. And they go nearly 30 minutes in a Chicago street fight. It probably elevates Booker T a little bit because it is a pretty prime time match, and he had just been doing the Harlem Heat thing, but these are all top guys. Meltzer didn't hate it. He gave it 3.5 stars. What do you remember about
it? First of all, I hate gimmick matches. Anybody that's ever worked with me knows that. Just personally, I also know, or knew then, and I know now, I still hate him, by the way, but just because I didn't like him didn't mean other people didn't like him. So I went into those types of matches grudgingly, and reluctantly, because I just didn't understand the appeal of it. And I really didn't think they made anybody look good. You know, there were certain people like the Road Warriors, for example, kind of made sense because of their style and what they were known for, going back to our earlier comments. They were not technical wrestlers. You know, the Nasty Boys, same thing. Those are the kinds of guys that, you know, a street fight or a no holds barred match, whatever you want to call it, kind of works for them. But I didn't like seeing Sting in a match like that. I didn't think it made him look good.
I guess we should mention here, the reason Booker T is in is because Lex Luger interfered trying to help Sting in his world title match on Saturday night against Sting, but he accidentally causes a DQ. There's a huge blow up about, Lex having Jimmy Hart as a manager, and ultimately Jimmy Hart on March 6th would pull Luger out of the street fight and put him into the Doomsday Cage match. And Luger's getting mad at Jimmy because he says that Sting is his friend, but he still abandoned him. So they're looking for an opponent or another tag team partner, and it's Booker T. Why was Booker T the guy here? And what was the story you're trying to tell with pulling Luger out of the tag team match?
Well, I think the story with Luger and Sting, and I think it was a slow build and a slow burn, was to get them on opposite sides of the equation, just not doing it quickly. It was a slow burn, and we used Jimmy. As you lay it out to me, and I'm remembering back on it now, it's unfortunate, you know, because again, Jimmy didn't have that kind of heat. Everybody loved Jimmy Hart. That was the problem with Jimmy in that kind of a role, where you start to put or try to put heat on him. That worked 10 years earlier. But by this time, Jimmy had spent so much time around Hulk. Jimmy had been around for so long. There's a certain point, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, when wrestlers have been around a decade or more, I don't care if they're trying to be heels or not, once you've been around that long, the audience is going to like you no matter what you do. And, you know, that was one of the problems that we had, or challenges we had, with Ric Flair. Ric Flair, and I know I'm going the wrong way around the block here, and it's kind of weird comparing Ric Flair to Jimmy Hart, and I don't mean to do that, but the psychology is the same. Rick had been around for so long, even though he was working as a heel, the audience liked him. They loved Rick. He was doing heel shit, and they loved Rick. His promos, you know, he could get heat doing a promo, but by the time he got in the ring, he was Ric Flair. And it was, you know, I used to joke, you know, Ric Flair could, you know, set puppies on fire and stomp them out all the way to the ring, and people would cheer him once he got to the middle of the ring. mean, it was just really hard to get heat on Rick. And Jimmy Hart was kind of in that same category, to a degree, a lesser degree, but to a degree. So using Jimmy in a role like that as an adjunct to try to get heat on Lex was pretty ineffective. But that's what we did, for better or worse, or what we were trying to do, for better or worse. As far as, why Booker, we all recognize Booker was a great talent. He needed to be elevated. He was great on the mic. He was great in the ring. He was easy to work with. The audience loved him. It was just a way to elevate him. Nothing more, nothing less.
I guess we should mention the very next night, Sting and Lex are back together and they beat the American Males. On the April 1st Nitro, the Giant, who had just turned face 7 days earlier in a great turn, is now a heel again. And he's supposed to team with Sting to take on the Harlem Heat. But Jimmy Hart pays off the Heat to walk out, and then the Giant turns on Sting. I hope this is as easy to follow as it is for me. They wrestle for 2 minutes and 41 seconds before Luger saves Sting for the DQ, and then Hart tells Luger that he'd be sorry. As we fast forward, you probably have an idea where this is going. Sting and Luger beat Flair and Giant by DQ, and there's a spot where Sting has Flair in the Scorpion, and Woman throws coffee in Sting's eyes, which I guess is kind of fun. A couple of weeks later, they go to a no DQ, or a no decision rather, with Flair and Giant. And the rules sort of don't make any sense here. Surprise. It's explained that the tag titles are at stake, and the TV title, and the world title, but that Sting could also pin Luger or the Giant, and Giant could pin Flair and win the titles. What the fuck is this?
A mess. A giant clusterfuck of a mess. I mean, as you're laying that out to me, now I've been around the business for 30 years. I can think in shorthand when I hear this kind of stuff, but I'm trying to follow along with this and imagining what anybody was thinking, including myself, when this was approved. And I'm going, what in the world? This was a mess. I mean, you'd have to have 3 assistants and a calculator to try to keep up with that storyline. That's how ridiculous that was. No. And I want to take this opportunity to apologize for it right now. I'm sorry to everyone who happened to be watching that story arc and that clusterfuck. I really do. At this moment in real time, I feel horrible.
The finish came when Woman gives Flair the coffee. He tries to throw it at Sting or Luger, but it goes in the Giant's eyes instead. So Sting and Lex just leave the ring.
I mean, because there's nothing like a hot cup of coffee to a 450-pound guy's face. I mean, you're 7 foot tall, 450 pounds, can literally pick up the back end of a Volvo and move it. But man, if you get hit with a cup of coffee, you're down. You're just down. Especially if a woman throws it, you're down.
Oh my gosh. Some of this early 96 stuff, maybe not the best stuff in the world. On the April 29th Nitro, we see Sting and Luger beat the Harlem Heat in a tag title match, and Jimmy Hart throws in the towel for the Heat against their wishes. Jimmy Hart is a featured spot of 1996 so far, is he not?
Oh God, I can only apologize once for show.
Yeah, I understand.
It's just, it's real. This is painful for me. I can only imagine what people watching at home felt like, because 20 years later, it's painful for me to listen to this.
Yeah, it's kind of rough. I'll take you that. Let's get to Slamboree. This is May 19th in Baton Rouge. Once again, Sting finds himself in the main event spot. This time he's challenging the Giant for the world title. And it's been a while since he's got a title match like this on pay-per-view. The Giant gets the win though. He retains in about 11 minutes, and Meltzer didn't hate it, man. He says this had great crowd heat and excellent psychology. And, he didn't dump on it. He gave it 3.25 stars. He says that, good storyline and better action than you'd have any right to expect given Giant's level of experience, and that the Giant had never been known to carry people well. So I guess that's quite a compliment here, because he's been known to be pretty critical of Paul White, but he put him over here, 3.25 stars. Do you remember this one?
I do remember it. And I think, and it's, gracious of Dave to give Paul credit for that, but the credit really belonged to Steve.
Sure.
I mean, Steve made that match. And, hats off to Paul for listening and cooperating and doing the best that, because Paul was amazingly athletic. There was nothing that you could kind of lay out or explain to Paul or ask him to do that he was incapable of doing. The challenge that we had with Paul, and the challenge that Paul had himself, was much like Bill Goldberg in the beginning of Goldberg's career when Bill was still green, kind of fresh meat right out of the power plant, and everybody knew that Bill was going to be the guy eventually, and it was pretty apparent. And before you knew it, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys are in his ear, pulling him in a lot of different directions. Some of them because they were trying to help him legitimately, and some of them because they had their own agenda. And, keeping the guy off balance and stirring him up and making him insecure might have helped, fulfill that agenda. And that was just the politics in the way of the world, in the locker room. It's just a fact. And Paul was, to a lesser degree than Bill, because there wasn't as much emphasis on Paul as there was a Bill, at least not initially. But Paul was another guy that was he didn't really have any experience of his own. He couldn't listen to 2 or 3 or 4 different opinions and based on his own experience make a decision. He had a hard time with that. So when certain people were telling him, no, you got to sell more, and other people were telling him, no, you're a giant, you can't sell it all. And Paul would often be stuck in the middle of some of that advice and direction, whether it came from agents or talent that he respected or whatever. So if there were issues with Paul, it really wasn't as much Paul as it was poor leadership and poor management and the people around him. And Paul being, I don't want to say immature in a derisive way, but he was very, very young and just didn't have a lot of experience. So he was insecure about certain things. That led to awkward matches and poor decisions in the ring more than anything, not because of his physical abilities or lack thereof. But I think in this particular match, there was a great level of trust between Steve and Paul, and that's one of the reasons that match worked out so well. But I would have to give the majority of the credit to Steve.
The next night, Sting and Luger beat the Faces of Fear, but what really matters is on May 27th, Sting and Scott Steiner would go to a double DQ. And the reason that's notable is this is the episode where we saw the debut of Scott Hall. At this point, has you already had a conversation with Sting about what this invasion angle may look like? Or is that something you were still putting together with the other talent?
Literally, it was still coming together in my head at this point. I had a really, really rough idea, but on this particular night, and I remember it because A, it was my birthday, and B, it was Scott's debut, and I actually picked Scott Hall up from the hotel. We've covered this before, but I had picked Scott up to kind of get a feel for where his head was at. So that whole Nitro is still very much a vivid memory for me, but the idea, the NWO idea, was generally, I had it down. I wasn't convinced that the third man mystery was going to be such a prominent part of that storyline. That didn't really happen until the second week when Nash came out. And that's when I was really convinced that third man had to be a prominent, because I knew we had momentum. So to answer your question, I'm sorry. No, the third man had not been something I'd given a lot of thought to, and I certainly didn't discuss it with anybody, including Sting at that point.
The World Peace Festival happened on June 1st, and Giant would beat the Stinger there in Los Angeles. A couple of days later on Nitro for the World Tag Team titles, Sting and Lex would go to a no contest with the Steiners because the Giant came down and chokeslammed Rick on the floor. And at the end of the show, this is what's most notable about that episode. Scott Hall comes back out, this time to the announcer's table to confront you, and Sting comes to interrupt him. And they're talking about how Hall wanted you guys to get 3 guys together. And Sting told Hall that he still doesn't have anybody with him. And of course, it says, "You're in the jungle, baby. This is WCW." The toothpick in the face. And then there's a little bit of physicality. You move out of the way, and Sting slaps Hall. Pretty famous moment in Nitro history here. We're really starting to heat up the NWO angle, and we keep it going when on June 10th, we see the debut of Kevin Nash. Now, on this show, Sting was pulling double duty. He beat Ming, and he also had a tag match, of course, with Lex against Flair and Arn. Another giant interference, more DQs. At this point, as we're cruising towards the Great American Bash, we've got Kevin Nash, we've got Scott Hall. Where does Sting think he's going to fit in storyline wise at this point?
By that point, I'm talking to Sting about being the third guy. Mostly because of the scene that you described. Again, it wasn't something that I had considered in great detail. I mean, I knew there was, because we knew there had to be a third guy. I knew it was going to be a part of the storyline. I just didn't realize on May 27th of 96 how important it could be or should be. But after that scene in particular with Steve, and certainly, feeling the crowd, by that time I'm talking to Sting about being the third guy.
Let's get to the Great American Bash. June 16th, Sting would beat Steven Regal with the Scorpion in 16.5 minutes, 3.5 stars. And man, Meltzer cannot put over Regal enough. He says, this guy's probably the most complete performer in the company. What'd you think of the match? It is a bit odd for Sting to be in. He doesn't seem to have any sort of issue with Regal, but it is a good match, so we can't fuss too much. What's the thinking here?
Well, there wasn't a lot of storyline there. We were evolving into something much bigger at that point, but you still had to have Sting, on the card. He was still one of our top draws. And that match was cold, meaning it didn't have a storyline behind it. There was not a hot angle behind it, but sometimes you need to do that. And it's also a way to elevate Regal. Regal was a great hand. I mean, I really liked Steve a lot from the very beginning. His interviews, I thought they were fantastic. It's my kind of interview, my kind of character, but by 96, that was the one. That was the one weakness at that point with Steve. His interviews just weren't connecting with the audience, but his ring work was phenomenal.
Do you think that what Sting lacked maybe in promo skills, he just made up with charisma? Flair has often talked about how Sting really had no idea what he was doing on promos when he first came into Crockett, but he would just deliver it with such excitement. Just the big scream and beating his chest. And obviously he had a cool look with the blonde hair and the rat tail and, the face paint and the bright colors. He just had this charisma. Was that your experience too? Like, he didn't necessarily have a promo put together, but he knew how to go out there and just get people excited.
But you could, yes, to answer your question, but you could also say the same. I mean, look at the Ultimate Warrior. People loved that character. They loved his promo. They couldn't understand the lick of what he said because very little of it made any sense at all, but it was so colorful and he had so much energy that people just got with it. It was larger than life. It was electric. The same could probably be said to a certain extent to Randy Savage. Going back, I've been over the last couple of weeks and doing watch-alongs, and we did the Randy Savage episode a couple of weeks ago. I spent a lot of time looking at Randy Savage promos, and fans who listen to the show, send you clips of things on Twitter that Randy has done in the past. And I went back and watched many of them. Some of them I had never seen before, and a lot of Randy's promos didn't really make a lot of sense. But they were entertaining because of his charisma and his character. I mean, some of them did. Some of them were many of them were very storyline driven, but some of them were just
out there.
Randy being Randy. And I think Sting did have a lot of that. He wasn't a storyteller. When he would do a promo, and again, this was at a time, context is king. This was at a time when promos weren't heavily scripted. We relied on our talent to really go out and understand who they were wrestling next week or next month or who their issue was with and more or less improv it. And I would say, Sting was on a scale of 1 to 10, from a storytelling kind of structural aspect, in terms of a 3-act storyline in his promo, he was probably a 6 or a 7. But when it came to his energy and his passion and his excitement, he was off the charts. He was a 10.5, and it made up for it. So I think Rick's probably right about that.
Let's talk about what's next. Of course, we're on our way to Bash at the Beach, but before we get there, I want to cover June 24th because the Harlem Heat win the tag titles in a triangle match over Sting and Luger and the Steiners when Hall and Nash come out with baseball bats, and during all the chaos, Booker T schoolboys Lex Luger for the win. And that means Lex and Sting are no longer the tag champs. What do you remember? This is a pretty famous skit because Kevin Nash would say years later, you made your whole locker room look like dog shit. We held everybody off with 2 guys in baseball bats. What say you? What'd you think of the baseball bat angle and the way to use this as a distraction for a schoolboy tag title loss?
Kevin wasn't wrong, but it also set the stage for what, again, have to remember, I'm talking to Sting about being the third guy. I was also talking to Hogan at that time about being the third guy. I wasn't 100% confident that I had Hogan. I wouldn't be 100% confident until about 2 hours before he actually came out and turned heel at the Bash at the Beach. So I had to have dry powder. And from a storyline perspective, that gave Sting an out. So that if I needed Sting to be the third guy, there was a follow-up promo. There was something that we could point to. Sting should have been there, could have been there. He could have seen what was going on. But, Kevin's point, making the entire, locker room look bad, that's one way of looking at it. I honestly don't agree with it. I understand why he says it, and there's a certain amount of logic to it, but I don't think the audience, if you would have polled anybody, would have said, oh man, I can't believe it. The entire WCW locker room looks bad. That's a wrestling point of view. That's a wrestler's point of view. It's not necessarily an audience's point of view. Sometimes the audience doesn't react the way wrestlers, when they analyze something to death, particularly when they're wanting to analyze it for their own benefit or from their own point of view, for whatever reason, they don't always connect. I don't think anybody thought that. I don't think the entire locker room looked bad.
Right.
I think it looked intense. I think it made Hall and Nash look devastating. I think it raised the stakes in an incredible way that obviously worked very, very well in hindsight. So while I understand the logic of the criticism, I don't agree with it. I should be a politician. Fuck.
I think you kind of are. All right, let's get to Bash at the Beach.
Well, no, I take exception to that. What do you mean? I think I can. I try to give you straight answers here. I try not to be political.
Okay. Well, give me a straight answer here. Do you or do you not use Dollar Shave Club?
I do. I love Dollar Shave. I just took a shower about a half hour before we did this show because I was out all afternoon. I sold my horse today. I feel really bad about that. But I've been out with my horse almost all day, hanging around horses in barns. And I knew when I wanted to do this show that I had to feel good. I had to get my energy up. I knew I had to take a shower. So I went up. I used my Dollar Shave Club product, my hair product, and some conditioner, and actually trimmed my beard up a little bit. And when I came downstairs, my wife said, "What's that smell?" I said, "That's me." She said, "You don't smell like a horse anymore." I said, "Of course not, honey. I just took a shower and used my Dollar Shave Club product." She said, "I like it." There you go.
There you go. Check it out, man. Amber and lavender body wash, Big Cloud Good Shake hand cream, Boogie's Pacific pomade, and you are ready to get looking and feeling good. You're going to look your best, feel your best, and smell your best now, thanks to Dollar Shave Club. And of course, they've got all your great razors and shave supplies. You've heard us talk about the shave butter here on the show for a while now. but you can go ahead and get your life going the way you want when you start looking good and feeling good. And you can take care of your whole body now at Dollar Shave Club. Don't forget those executive razors and shave butter. It's still there, but you can get your hair ready. You can get your body wash on, everything you need. And now you can even get an amazing deal on a starter set. We recommend the Daily Essentials starter set because Eric absolutely loves the body cleanser. You can't go wrong with any of them. My person actually likes the amber lavender. Head on over to dollarshaveclub.com/83 weeks. That's dollarshaveclub.com/83 weeks and pick up your starter set for just $5. Can't believe that's real. After your starter set, products are going to ship at a regular price. So just make sure you check out all the new videos they've got there too that explain everything they're offering now. It's dollarshaveclub.com/83 weeks. I want to give it to you one more time. You get this starter set for just $5 at dollarshaveclub.com/83 weeks. You're going to love it. Eric does too. Let's talk about Bash at the Beach. We know the main event. Randy Savage, Lex Luger, and Sting are going to take on Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and a mystery partner. We've covered this extensively in our archives, which are available now at 83weeks.com. The match gets 3 stars. Luger does a stretcher job here after a Stinger splash. Sting was supposed to be the backup plan. You decide you don't really need him. He's receptive, but not necessarily enthusiastic, but receptive. Everybody can see the power in the storyline. And the next night, Sting gets a win over Arn Anderson. And after the match, Okerlund comes out to the ring to interview Sting, and he cut one of, if not the very best of his career. What do you remember about the Sting promo the night after Bash at the Beach? I think a lot of people just miss it.
Sting was pretty passionate, and I want to back up just a little bit. Steve, I don't know that he was disappointed that we went with Hogan. I really don't. I think Steve was ready. I think part of Steve, I talked to him a lot about it. Now I had, by this time I had gotten to be pretty good friends with Steve. I could have really, really personal conversations about things. There was no business tension. It wasn't ever financial. It was never about that with Steve. It was really about what was best for his career, what was best for WCW. He put WCW in front of himself. Probably as much or more than anybody. And I think Steve was excited at the prospect of turning heel because he sensed that things were changing. The wrestling audience's appetite was changing. The way we were telling stories was changing. And I know Steve was, half of him was really excited to change with it. But I think the other part of him was pretty comfortable being that baby face, being that guy that everybody knew you could always go back to. It was kind of like Ric Flair. Steve's a really smart guy. He saw, Ric Flair's career and how many times people tried to move on without Ric Flair, and Ric Flair was just always there. He was always the guy you could go to, and you could always depend on Ric to get a rating or pay-per-view, or if you needed a great storyline, you knew you could go to Ric Flair to get it. And I think Steve knew that he could be that guy and was very comfortable in that role. So I think part of him wanted to do it, but I think part of him was relieved when it was Hogan. I don't think there was any resentment or disappointment, really. I think there was, if anything, I've never asked him about this. I probably should at some point, but I don't think there was that much disappointment. I think if anything, there was probably more relief. And I think the storyline that you saw with Steve and Sting and Arn was more a reflection of kind of a renewed, invigorated Steve Borden, Sting the character, because it was pretty obvious at that point to everybody. The handwriting was on the wall. The NWO was hot. Everybody knew it was going to be the NWO versus WCW. The premise of that storyline was, so big and so bold, anybody, could see it. And Steve knew that he was going to be front and center in that story.
So they start a New Japan tour in July right after that. And I think this is the tour where Randy Savage and Hawk get into a fight. You remember that?
I remember it happening, but it was just one of those things.
Sure. We got lots of matches on house shows with Hall and Nash beating Sting and Luger by DQ. And they started running commercials during this time on Saturday night where there would be a commercial for the NWO and it would say, paid for by the NWO. The July 29th episode of Nitro we've just recently covered. That's the one where the ambulance was called, the lawn dart of Rey Mysterio Jr. You can hear all about that in the archives, but Sting played a part in that as well. We also get to Hog Wild 1996, which we very recently covered, also available in the archives. As a reminder, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash would beat Lex Luger and Sting there. And Meltzer would say after all this hype, the match didn't really have that much heat. It wasn't very intense and it only got 1.5 stars. A couple of days later, cause that was a Saturday pay-per-view, Sting and Lex would go to a no contest with Hall and Nash because, Nick Patrick would pull Hall out of harm's way. And this is the first time we really can confirm that Nick Patrick is definitely a heel referee. August 15th, we got the Clash of the Champions, a triangle match for the tag titles. We got Sting and Lex, the Steiners, in the heat. And this goes to a no contest again. It gets 1.75 stars, but the big story is we're developing the NWO storyline. And here in my own hometown, Huntsville, Alabama, on August 19th, Sting and Lex Luger are supposed to wrestle Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, but instead they have a lengthy discussion and they all decide to join forces to take on the NWO at War Games. Now, Eric, it was written in the dirt sheets around this time that the plan was supposed to be the Horsemen versus the NWO, but you guys pivot and throw Sting and Lex Luger into the mix. Why the audible?
I don't know that it was. I mean, just because the dirt sheets reported it doesn't mean it was true. First off, in my mind, it was going to be Sting and Luger, not the Horsemen. The Horsemen were going to be there, but I also wanted to save Rick. I didn't want Rick to be the first wave, so to speak. I wanted to be able to save Rick for later on as the story developed. So I would disagree with the commentary that there was a pivot. It was really the original story as it was laid out.
The next week we see Sting and Lex take on McMichael and Benoit, and they go to a no contest. And this is an interesting storyline because, you've got the NWO element, but you've also got the Horsemen and Sting and Lex all in this. Hogan's going to come out and taunt Mongo, allowing Hall to ambush McMichael and lay him out. And then Nash comes in and uses the jackknife on Benoit, and Scott Hall uses the razor's edge on Sting and then spray paints them all. Any sort of pushback from Sting, or is he getting that, we're booking heat, as you like to say? And I guess one of the things we haven't talked about yet, what is Kevin Sullivan's involvement here? You've told me before that what he was best at was booking heat.
Yeah, I mean, these finishes, I think Kevin would go in with a pretty good idea. I mean, we talked through it during the week prior to Nitro or prior to a pay-per-view, whichever the case may be. We'd have a pretty good idea what we wanted to do. But oftentimes when we got to the building, once we got there with Scott and Kevin and Terry, things changed. And oftentimes what started out as one idea evolved into something sometimes similar, sometimes quite different. So Kevin was involved, certainly was involved. I was involved to a degree. But those finishes, particularly with the NWO, took on more of a life of their own once everybody got in the room. And there was, a couple reasons for that. One, it was a different kind of storyline. The heat, booking for heat, you started out by asking me what was Sting's reaction to this. That was one of the things that I do recall was kind of a constant issue early NWO, was because we were booking so much heat and because we wanted the NWO to be so overwhelming, almost untouchable, almost unbeatable. It's traditional storytelling. We wanted WCW to be the underdog. We wanted them to be so beaten down that the journey for them to come out on top would take a long time, and you'd really want to get the audience behind them to see it happen. But in order for that to happen, it has to look like it almost never will. And I mean, that's a typical approach to any storyline, whether it's a television series or a movie or whatever else. Act one, your baby face, if you will, character, you know who he is or she is, everything's great. All of a sudden, by the end of act one, they're devastated. They're on this journey now that they may or may not ever achieve. And throughout the entire the beginning of the third act, it looks like it's never going to happen. And then at the end of the third act, boom, your baby face is a hero again. That's not an uncommon structure to any storyline. And that's what we were doing with WCW at that time. The challenge for me was Steve in a very professional way. I want to make this really clear. Guys like Steve, Arn was a little more problematic. Arn had a harder time adjusting to it. Lex was pretty easy to work with when it came to this type of thing. But that doesn't mean they weren't concerned, because we were totally shattering the formula. Babyface is a champion, heel cheats and wins, babyface gets his comeback. Those arcs were usually, 2-3 week arcs at best. And again, and there's a reason for it. Most of the booking philosophy in WCW dated back to NWA. In the early 90s, Dusty Rhodes, Ole Anderson, Ric Flair. Jim Ross we don't ever talk about Jim's involvement in booking, but Jim was very much involved on the booking committee, during the Bill Watts era and the Dusty Rhodes era and a lot of those eras prior to me taking over, obviously. And a lot of that booking mentality came out of the South, and a lot of the booking in the South was more or less a weekly booking strategy because they were weekly territories. Unlike the Midwest, which was a monthly territory, people were more used to writing stories that were very short term and where the baby faces would get their comeback quickly and always look good. Well, with the NWO, that changed. And the NWO would get their heat for an extended period of time during this time. And it was a totally new way of doing things for a lot of people. And certain ones had issues with it. Steve to a lesser degree, but he was concerned. He wanted to understand it. He wanted to understand it well enough that he could perform to the best of his ability within that storyline. But it was completely different than what everybody was doing at the time. So it was a challenge.
Well, let's talk about September 2nd. We see Steiners beat Sting and Lex in 39 seconds by DQ. Of course, this is because referee Nick Patrick is there and there's a limo. DiBiase gets out of the limo and it's shown here that he is with the NWO, and he makes that very clear. And Sting throws a rock or a brick through the limo window and they drive off, and then they steal a police car and chase them down the freeway. The fuck is this?
I just watched that episode about a week ago, not even a week ago, as a watch along on twitch.tv/83 weeks. So I remember this one pretty vividly. It was a swerve. There was nobody in the limo.
But chasing them in a police car.
You know what I did? You know what I said? I said, can you imagine, if that was real? Now I'm busting my own balls here because I tried to integrate as much reality in everything we did as possible. So I'm looking at that scene after, I'm watching it 20 years after the fact, and I'm busting my own balls here. And I said, God, can you imagine, these two guys steal a police car? Well, if that were really going to happen, right? The cop would have grabbed his radio that he's wearing on his shirt or, on his shoulder and reported that. And a bunch of cops would have pulled that car over, and they would have pulled that thing over, and here's Sting I think he was wearing red tights that night, right? No shirt on, face paint. Then you got Lex Luger in the car. And I can just imagine what the cops were thinking. It's like, are you guys on your way to a club or what? What the hell? Yeah, that was a little ridiculous, but I guess it was an attempt to show just how hot Sting and Lex were and how they ignored their better judgment and stole the cop car.
It's hilarious.
It's fucked up. It's fucked up.
Oh gosh. September.
Are you glad we could laugh about it now?
Oh, absolutely. And here's the thing.
Knowing it still worked. It still worked, right? We still made a lot of money with this angle. Nobody said, fuck it, I'm not going to watch this NWO shit anymore because Sting and Lex stole the cop car. This is where shit gets analyzed a little bit too much. I mean, you do have to analyze it, but
no,
yeah,
I'm not breaking it down. I'm just saying, what the fuck? I mean, come on, it's funny.
No, but I'm not breaking it down. I'm going, what the fuck? You know, it was corny.
Sure. All right, Eric, we got to take a time out here to tell everybody about the importance of not driving drunk. You know, it feels like something that nobody talks about anymore, but you should know the risks. Everyone should, of driving drunk. You can get in a crash, people can get hurt, or even worse, people can get killed. And let's take a moment to look at some of these surprising statistics. Almost 29 people in the U.S. die every day in some sort of alcohol impaired vehicle crash. That's like a person every 50 minutes. Even though drunk driving fatalities have fallen by a third in the last 3 decades, drunk driving crashes still claim more than 10,000 lives each year. Many people are unaware that driving while high can be just as dangerous. In 2015, 42% of drivers who were killed in crashes tested positive for drugs. So it's not so harmless after all if you're getting behind the wheel, is it? And get this, from 2007 to 2015, marijuana use among drivers killed in crashes doubled. The truth is, driving while high is deadly. So stop kidding yourself. If you're impaired from either alcohol or drugs, do not get behind the wheel. If you feel different, you drive different. If you drive high, you get a DUI. Drive sober or get pulled over. Eric, I think this is an important message, and I'm glad we were able to talk about it here today.
I do too. And, you know, in our business, you know, we laugh and joke about guys having beers and, you know, partying and doing things like that. But, man, all you have to do, you know, out where I live here in Wyoming, you know, you get a lot of tourists, you get a lot of people that are out here and they're on vacation and, you know, they're going down the highway out in the middle of nowhere at 70 or 75 miles an hour. And all you have to do to get shocked back into reality is stumble across, you know, one of those car wrecks and see the devastation that results from people deciding it's okay to have a couple beers and take off down the highway. And it brings you back to reality really quickly. It's just not worth it. And, you know, I love to have a beer or two when the time is right, but it's never right when you're behind the wheel or on a motorcycle.
So just don't do it. All right, Eric, let's talk about the big angle, September 9th. This is what everybody remembers. Probably the biggest angle, maybe in Sting's career up to this point. Meltzer wrote of it, the announcers played the Sting angle huge as if Sting has just turned heel. Enjoy the NWO, excuse me. And actually, they did a tremendous job of getting it over as a stunning angle. The angle was made more believable because they used the tape of Sting's voice. Of course, Steve Borden himself wasn't in Columbus, Georgia that night, talking with Ted DiBiase about whether he could trust him as Luger came out. And Luger's in the middle of a match against Rick Steiner when Nick Patrick calls Luger to the parking lot saying something involving Sting was going on outside. And it's teased for a few minutes, and we finally see that Sting has no-showed the interview. And then we get a shot of the parking lot. Luger comes out and a fake Sting jumps him, punts him around, and they go off the air, leaving the fans with no hints as to whether or not it was actually Sting.
Brilliant.
It is. Let's talk about Jeff Farmer, whose idea was the Jeff Farmer turn.
Jeff came to us. There was you know, when you put Jeff in makeup, in Sting's makeup, he had a lot of the same facial structure. He was the exact same size. So I think Jeff came to us, came to probably one of the agents, you know, Terry Taylor, possibly Kevin, suggested it. And then once we saw Jeff, you know, dressed up as Sting, it was kind of like, holy shit, this could be really cool.
It was cool. And I think it's, if I'm honest with you, it's the storyline. I mean, I remember the limo thing with Jeff Farmer, the fake Sting, like it was yesterday. You know, when I got back into wrestling, it was because I was flipping through the channels and I see Hulk Hogan in all black, and I'm still sort of trying to keep up with what it is. But that storyline in particular, where, oh my God, Sting may be a bad guy too, got me hook, line, and sinker. Tremendous stuff here. I guess we should talk about what Meltzer was speculating might happen here. WCW can go on one of several directions for the pay-per-view show, with the most dramatic being that the fake Sting will be on Hogan, Hall, and Nash's team at War Games, and either Mongo or Benoit can join the Flair, Anderson, Luger team. Later in the match, the real Sting can show up and either protest his innocence with nobody believing him or save the day, or the real Sting can be put in the NWO corner and turn on him, saying it was his own undercover plan. Or they could actually turn him, although that seems to be the least likely of all potential scenarios. All of this will cause a ton of speculation and curiosity over the week, but as Bash at the Beach showed, that has minimal effect on the buy rate. So let's talk about it. There's lots of discussion about who deserves credit for the Crow Sting, but almost all signs point to Scott Hall. Was it Scott Hall who added the wrinkle of the face paint and patterning it after the Crow, or was it his idea, this entire storyline? Set the record straight on that.
No, I remember this very vividly because I was my eyes opened as to what Scott Hall was capable of, and I love Scott Hall. I mean, he's one of the guys that I see on the road that I really look forward to seeing, which I never thought I would say that. But when I see Scott today, I just want to take a minute to put him over, because I think, for a guy to overcome everything that Scott has overcome in his life, particularly the addiction issues that he's had and a lot of the personal problems that have led up to the addiction issues. And when I see him out now doing autograph sessions, taking photographs with fans, I see a guy who's not just doing it to make a buck. And a lot of guys do. And there's nothing wrong with that. I understand that. Scott genuinely enjoys and is grateful for the opportunity to be out there signing autographs and taking pictures with fans. He probably loves the business more today in a healthy way than he ever has. He might have been obsessed with it more before, but I think he enjoys it more, and he loves it. And I'm so happy to see that. Now, in '96, I didn't feel that way about Scott Hall. When he was, when he was either drunk or he was pilled up or whatever he was a jagoff. I mean, he just was not a pleasant person to be around. And working with Scott was a challenge. It was more than a challenge. It was fucking painful, because you never knew what Scott you were going to get. And he was a master at stirring shit up and stirring people up and just keeping everybody around him off balance. And that's not a great scenario with any kind of performer. And Scott he'd find a way to get under people's skin and he would do it to entertain himself, just to laugh at them, laugh at how they would react. That was Scott 80% of the time. But the 20% of the time, when he was clear-headed and for whatever reason he hadn't been on a 6-day bender or whatever he was doing, and he was clear and he was really thinking, he thought of more ways to get other people over than he did ways to improve his own situation. And this was one of those moments. And I remember it was me, I think Kevin, might have been Kevin Sullivan. There were one or two other people in the room. We were in a dressing room, and Scott, and Sting, obviously, and we were all just sitting there talking about different ideas. And Scott just went off on this Crow character. And I mean, we went off on it in detail. Not only, the scary man and kind of describing the character and how he would show up and, he'd be in the audience, and he was just so devastated because of what happened, what the NWO did to his beloved WCW and the betrayals that he'd seen taking place, and just seeing WCW crumble, and because of his history with the company. All of that was the motivation, as Scott described it, for Sting to be darker than dark, and to sit up there and try to, petrify the NWO and just be that, ominous presence that would show up in the middle of nowhere and do devastating shit. And right down to describing the character. And he referenced the Crow movie, which was popular with Brandon Lee at the time. He referenced the Crow character in that movie as kind of the archetype for Steve. And Steve had seen the movie, so he really understood it. And visually, and he understood the character, because that Crow character, the Crow movie, or the character in the Crow movie, there was a lot of similarities. We, as we like to say in the entertainment business, borrowed from a lot from that movie. So much so that I'm surprised we never got sued, quite frankly. But Steve saw it immediately and took to it. But that is 100%. Nobody will be able to convince me that anybody had anything to do with that idea other than Scott Hall and eventually Sting, because Sting had to become that character, and he did. He really, really understood it. But Scott Hall painted that picture 100%.
I'm glad you brought up the lawsuit thing, because I've always wondered, how are they able to do this? And I sort of thought behind the scenes, you guys had some sort of deal. You're saying, no, that's not the case. You just rolled the fucking dice and never got in trouble.
We rolled the dice and never got in trouble.
Wow.
One of the few times we didn't get sued by somebody.
It's amazing, with Turner up your nuts about anything, that they didn't have an issue with that. Apparently whoever was in charge didn't go to the fucking movies, huh?
No, but Turner was up our ass over a lot of things that had to do with WWF and doing anything that looked like one of their characters or saying anything bad about the WWF at that time. But I don't think anybody at Turner Broadcasting really saw the connection between what Sting was doing and that movie.
Let's talk about,
and if they did, they didn't have a concern about it.
Let's talk about the actual match. Who would have, I know you're guessing here, but if you had to guess, who would have helped put this match together? Because it is a pretty iconic deal. You see the fake Sting come out, and just as Meltzer had sort of guessed, you do see the real Sting come out, and he attacks all the bad guys and then says something like, "Do you believe me now?" This happens after they sort of pushed him out of a pre-match interview. They being Arn Anderson, Ric Flair, and Lex Luger. He makes his point and leaves the cage, and the NWO, of course, gets the win. A star and 3/4 is what it got in the Observer, but it really wasn't about the match. It was about the story. I loved it. Thought it told a great story. What'd you think?
I thought it was great too. I thought it was one of the most dramatic, interesting, layered stories that at that point had really ever been told. Even more so than the Third Man. The Third Man was dramatic. It was shocking. Nobody thought Hulk Hogan was going to turn. There was a great build up to it. There's a lot of things that made that moment, one of the most powerful moments for sure in my career, and maybe in the history of WCW, and maybe in the top 5 or 8 or however anybody wants to quantify shit in the wrestling industry, at least in the last 30 years. But I think this particular story, because of what it led to and just the way it was executed and the layers within that story, I thought was really one of the best ones we've ever done.
Let's talk about the fallout. How's everybody feeling about it? It's the first time that Sting's really been in this spot. Was Sting a guy who was sort of protective of his character? Did he get it? What was his take?
Oh, he got it. He loved it. And this is why I think to this day, if we would have gone back in time and been able to interview Sting, 3 days after the Bash at the Beach and Hogan's turn, he might have done an interview where if he was 100% honest with himself, maybe he was more disappointed than I thought, perhaps. Steve kept a lot of, Steve was also a guy that never showed a lot. He didn't show his cards. He was not an emotional guy. If he was extremely happy about something, he didn't really know it. If he was upset about something or not comfortable with something, you couldn't really tell. He really, really kept his cards really close to the vest. He was great about that. But in this case, he was ecstatic. He was so ecstatic because he knew he hit a home run with a character, It was a character he could really sink his teeth in. Going back to the early part of this interview, where everybody wants to evolve. Everybody, whether you're an actor or a musician or whatever it is you want to do, you want to cut that next great song. You want to evolve as an artist, whatever your art may be. And I think Sting knew at this point that he hit it completely out of the park, and there was going to be amazing story to tell. But more importantly for Sting, I think just, I don't want to say selfishly, but personally, he felt really, really comfortable with that character. He loved it.
The next night is a big moment for Sting. He comes out and cuts a huge promo explaining what happened the last Monday on Nitro. He says that he was on a plane flying from LA to Atlanta. And when he finally landed in Atlanta, he turned on the TV and he was watching a replay, but it was a very convincingly done fake stinger. And he talked about his relationship with Lex, saying, I know where he lives. I know where he works out. I could have just went and got him, but I said, you know what? I'm just going to wait and see what happens on Saturday. And he tunes in on Saturday, and what does he see? More people doubting him, which brings him to Fall Brawl. And he decides to go face to face with Lex and let him know it wasn't him. And what he got was more doubt. And he says that he was the mediator, the babysitter, and he did it all for Lex Luger. And he's carried the banner, given his blood, sweat, and tears for WCW. But for all these wrestlers and commentators and fans to turn on him and doubt him, they can stick it. So he considers himself from now on a free agent. And he says, but that doesn't mean you won't see the stinger, but from time to time, I'm going to pop in when you least expect it. Who helped put together the promo? It is maybe the most important one of his career so far.
I worked with Steve pretty closely on that promo. But again, when I say I worked on it closely with him, it was more, here's where we're going. Here's what we're doing. This is the premise of the story. This is why you're upset. I mean, it was all pretty evident. It's not like I had to sit and explain it to him. Steve saw where the story was going. He understood, the betrayal or the lack of support or belief in him from the guys that, he had been close to. That was the premise of that whole storyline. So it's not like we had to sit down for hours and craft that promo. Again, we didn't script things heavily back then, but I worked pretty closely with Steve on that one.
I guess we should mention almost right after this, he jumps on a plane, he goes to Japan, and he works 4 dates over there for New Japan. And obviously it's a talent trade that's been pre-organized with Masahiro Chono and Saito and lots of talent sort of intermingling here, including a match where he tags up with Lex and he beats Arn and Regal. But I guess, what happens in Japan here, it doesn't really matter. The next time we see Sting talk after this promo, the night after Fall Brawl, is January of 1998. It's over a year. And during his time away, sort of off camera, he's still working a handful of house shows through October and early November, usually in triple threat matches against Randy Savage and the Giant. But he returns to television on October 21st. The imposter Sting is wrestling JL, and the real Sting comes out and puts him in the Scorpion. And this is before we get the real no reaction, slow moving Sting. He's still pretty animated like he usually was, but it is the first time we see him in the new look, which is the all black and white face paint. This is really doubling down on the Crow character. And this is what we all really remember him for. On October 28th, we got Booker T beating Luger by count out. Sting's in the audience. Luger sees him, goes out to talk to him, and Sting leaves. So Luger's counted out. And Meltzer would take to the newsletter to write, one of the reasons they're doing this angle with Sting is that in his contract, it's called for a specified maximum amount of dates in the year, and WCW only has a few dates left, and they needed him for the major house shows. So they're getting him off television and the minor house shows. This to me seems like bullshit. What say you, Eric?
It's ridiculous. This is, again, Dave Meltzer talking out of his ass, trying to convince the people that read his dirt sheets that he understood, or he had direct inside information or some other kind of insight that nobody else had. And he was reporting on it, and nothing was farther from the truth.
So the idea was, yes, he does have dates available, but for the sake of the storyline, take your ass home, right?
Well, I've said this before. absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah.
And with this character in particular, we didn't want him to show up on every single TV. We knew we wanted to build this. One of the things when I first got into WCW in particular, I didn't hear a lot of this when I was in the AWA, but when I got to WCW, there were a lot more people that had formerly worked with the WWF or knew people that worked in the WWF. And everybody looked at the WWF back when they were only doing 4 pay-per-views a year. Of course, everybody, would talk about, what a marketing genius Vince McMahon was and what a great storyteller Vince McMahon was. And, I used to hear that. And I didn't have a dog in the fight, so it wasn't like I was taking that on as a challenge or anything, but I did, try to understand what it was that WWF did so differently than WCW was doing. Again, WCW was more of a weekly territory. Vince McMahon was telling stories every week leading to a pay-per-view. So it would be, and there were only 4 pay-per-views a month or a year. So you would have, there seems like there's 4 pay-per-views a month now, but back then there were only, and prior to this, there were only 4 pay-per-views a year. So you had 3 months to develop a story. You had almost 12 TVs, 11 or 12 TVs to really build the heat and tell the story and make sure everybody understood why, wrestler A wanted to beat wrestler B. Everybody understood the stakes. Everybody understood the arc. Everybody understood the nuances of the stories going in. Whereas in WCW, again, it was just because of the nature of the way everybody learned the wrestling business, just geographically, they thought on a more week-to-week basis. So everything felt a little bit more hot-shotted to a degree. And one of the things that I really wanted to achieve from the very beginning with Steve and the Crow character was to build that out. I wanted to create a 12-month arc. I wanted that story to build for an entire year. And the only way you could do that was to have him showing up sporadically and intermittently, because if you started using him on every TV, you just run the fuck out of ideas. I mean, there's only so much you can do 52 weeks in a row and keep it interesting. But the nature of his story and his character and where his head was at as a character at that point and within the story was to show up at the right time. And, he would be gone for a little bit and then boom, he'd show up again. And it was a way to keep that character alive and keep it interesting without having to overexpose it.
On November 11th, we would see Jeff Jarrett wrestling Chris Benoit, and Jarrett gets a win by DQ because Sting hits the ring and gives Jarrett a reverse DDT. This is the first time we've seen it that I know of, and it would go on to become known as the Scorpion Death Drop. I assume that at this point, if you're going to have him do lots of drop-ins, you need a finisher that he could just put on like that, not necessarily a submission move, right?
Right. It had to happen fast, and it had to come from out of nowhere.
Let's talk about
and ideally it happened with him coming up from behind you, even better.
And that one fits the bill. November 18th is the day we see another layer added to the character. Luger's doing an interview and Sting comes out with a baseball bat. He shoves Luger with the bat, then hands him the bat and leaves. And now all of a sudden Sting's carrying a baseball bat. Why the introduction of Sting with a bat?
He needed something.
Yeah.
He needed a prop. I can't remember the name of the movie, but there was a movie about 10 years before this where all the characters in the movie were dressed. They were, it was a gang and they were all dressed up like a New York Yankee uniforms, and they'd have their faces painted and they all carried bats. It was pretty intense, pretty spooky, and very effective. And that's probably where that was derived from.
Let's talk.
Or borrow. I like to say borrowed, not derived or ripped off or stolen. I like to say borrowed.
I might be making this up, but are you talking about the Warriors movie?
Yeah.
Okay. Came out in 1979. You're old.
Well, cool.
Just throwing it out there.
Okay, I am old. Thank you very much.
World War III goes down on November 24th, and Sting makes a very brief appearance here. The Giant is wrestling Jeff Jarrett, and Sting comes down and gives Jarrett a reverse DDT. And the announcers would spend the rest of the show speculating as to whether or not Sting had joined the NWO. This was the second time Sting had attacked Jeff Jarrett. Is this because, much like Bruce Pritchard, Sting hates Jerry Jarrett?
No, Sting really hated country music and that silly guitar gimmick.
Sure.
So that was it. That was all it. He just hated that, hillbilly horse shit.
Where did the idea come from for Sting to start coming down from the ceiling? Cause that really adds a whole nother layer to the character.
That was, again, combination of a couple people. If I had to give the nod to one person, it would be Ellis Edwards. We were looking for, the question was, okay, what do we do with Sting that's unique? How can we be different? How can Sting's character be different than every other character? And one of the challenges that we started having about this time was, we had a hard time explaining why there happened to be cameras backstage capturing some of this shit, because prior to this, prior to 96, you didn't see a lot of it. You never saw it in WWF. You'd never really seen it in WCW. The only time you saw a camera backstage was doing a stand-up promo with Gene Okerlund and Tony Schiavone or whoever, right, in either company. Now, all of a sudden, we were opening up the backstage areas to action and interaction between characters where it was more or less, kind of a third wall situation. And there just happened to be a camera there. They call it cinema verite. But that had never been done before. And we liked it. And so did the audience. And it was really cool. And it really opened up our ability to tell stories and make them more believable, a la what we did, at Disney with Rey Mysterio and lawn darting him into the truck that got the SWAT team up our ass. What we found, though, as time went on, that, okay, well, how do you explain that the camera just happened to be there? And it's still kind of an issue, right? I mean, if you watch WWE right now to this day, you still see some of this interaction backstage. It's like, oh, why are they pretending the camera's not there? And number one, and number two, how does that camera just happen to be there? It's a little hard to explain, and you have to allow yourself to kind of just quit asking those kinds of questions because there's no good answer. But in the sense of that, in discussing how do we make it feel real? How do we explain it? How do we give Sting something different than everybody else? Everybody knew that, well, we can't have Sting coming down the aisle, because if he's coming through the same entrance as everybody else, well, guess what? He's back in a dressing room, which means somebody's going to have seen him, which means somebody's going to tell somebody else, which means there is no surprise. So we were looking for ways, and you can't have them coming down through the audience. You can have them coming down through the audience every once in a while. But again, if you do that every single time, it's no longer that cool. So Ellis Edwards is the one. He was our stunt guy. And by the way, he still works for WWE to this day.
Yeah, I just saw him last week. He's still there.
Yeah, and he was really good. He was a really good stuntman. And he understood how to set these stunts up. And that was really more Ellis's idea probably than anybody else. Again, we all kind of put it out there. How do we do something different? What's really cool? And then it, ended up with Ellis stepping forward and saying, well, we'll drop him from the ceiling. And everybody went, what the fuck? What do you mean drop him from the ceiling? And then as we talked through it, and Ellis, came to a couple nitros, and he brought the rig and he brought test dummies and, showed us that it could be done safely. And then had a couple other people that were stunt people from LA that were willing to do it to prove that it could work with a live person. And then eventually we trained Steve to do it.
Steve was okay with it, not too nervous about it?
No, of course he was nervous about it, but he was okay about it. He wanted to do it. He knew it was dramatic. He knew it would be awesome. But yeah, going up into the ceiling in an arena and being dropped down, the first couple times, it's scary as hell.
I hate to be that guy, but when the accident happens with Owen Hart, is there a discussion about what to do or not do moving forward?
Yeah, we did discuss it, and we were torn. Everybody was, and we weren't, obviously Brett, we felt badly for Brett, and he was part of the team, and there was a big consideration about that. We wanted to be respectful. And we debated it a lot. It took us a while to figure out what to do, and not to sound cold about it, but we were comfortable that we were comfortable we weren't going to have that mistake, right? We were comfortable that Steve was safe. Sting was comfortable. Steve was comfortable that he was safe. So that wasn't an issue. Then the issue became, okay, should we quit doing it out of respect? And at that point, it was kind of like, all right, what happens if a guy gets killed on a NASCAR track? Do they quit racing? Do they, put restrictors on the cars and keep the speed down to 130 miles an hour instead of 160 or 180? What happens if someone gets killed or paralyzed on a football field? There was that kind of discussion, and it came down to Steve. I let it be his decision. I wanted him to do it. I let him know that I was fully prepared to keep going forward if he was comfortable doing it. I didn't want to pressure him, but I also wanted him to know that if he was comfortable, so was I, so that it really was his decision. And he chose to keep doing it. So we did.
Well, I know that's been something that people have wondered about. Let's wrap up December. December 2nd, Rick Steiner comes to the ring and challenges Sting, and Sting comes through the crowd, gets in the ring, turns his back and holds his arms out. And then Rick clotheslines him from behind, knocks him out of the ring. And then Scott throws him back in. Rick hits him with a few punches and misses a clothesline. And then Sting hits him with the Scorpion Death Drop. He picks up the baseball bat and shoves Rick and hands him the bat and turns his back on him. And Rick's about to hit him with the bat, but Scott stops him. So Sting leaves the ring, walks up the aisle. And at this time, U-Haul and Nash are on commentary. Sting stops, points the bat at you guys, and then walks back towards the ring and leaves through the crowd the same way he came in. 2 weeks later, Sting is supposed to wrestle Rick Steiner, but when the Steiners come to the ring, we see a shot of Sting in the rafters. He walks away and then heads to the ring. And as he's coming down, the fans are breaking out a huge "We Want Sting" chant. And as Sting is walking through the crowd, we see another shot of the fake Sting walking through the crowd. Shivani doesn't seem to notice the difference, but the real Sting wasn't carrying a bat. And then we sort of go back and forth. Tell me about the idea of introducing the fake Stings again here, because you guys at one point would really overdose on this fake Sting angle to the point that there are dozens of these things.
They were over like hell in Japan. Jeff Farmer made a great career in Japan. I think he might still be wrestling as the fake Sting.
Sure.
And that's the honest truth. It was working in Japan. We were making a lot of money off of it. NWO shirts were selling like crazy in Japan. It was working from a storyline point of view. I agree that we probably overdid it. But that's the story behind it. There's nothing more artistic than that. We were making a lot of money with it.
The big confrontation, with where the Stings are having a stare down, and then the fake one puts a bat under the real one's chin. And then the real one pulls a bat out of his sleeve, knocks the bat out. It's a pretty cool deal, man. Of course, the Scorpion Death Drop comes for the fake Sting. Tony yells, "He just creamed him." And then Rick throws the bat back to Sting and he leaves through the crowd. So we've proven that even though he says he's a free agent, he's sort of on WCW's side. And at the end of the show, we see a huge fight with the NWO and WCW guys, and Sting comes out and everyone stops fighting to see what he'll do. Arn Anderson and Steve McMichael both attack Sting. Sting beats him up, and then Mysterio jumps on Sting's back and was flipped off. And then Sting just walks out, and fans are reacting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it feels like after having to sort of take a back seat to Hogan and Savage, oddly, as we wrap up 96, he's in a totally better spot than he was at the beginning of the year. You rejuvenated his career with this entire storyline, have you not?
He did. We did. Everybody did. It was a team effort. Starting with Scott Hall, Sting executing flawlessly, the team, Kevin Sullivan, everybody on the booking committee, Nash and Hall included, working hard to make it work so that it was a great story. But it was really all about Sting. I mean, he executed to perfection.
Well, and we're hoping to execute it to perfection next week. We're going to rewatch the very first Nitro because we're coming up on a very important anniversary. Next Monday, of course, is Labor Day, and Eric and I will still have a Starrcast hangover, but you can tune in and check out the very first Nitro because that actually happened on September 4th. But before we get there, let's do some questions, rapid fire from some of our listeners. Eric, are you ready?
I'm ready. Bring it.
Stuart wants to know, was Surfer Sting as a return character ever on the table beyond 96? Did you guys ever consider going back to Surfer Sting?
No, absolutely not. I think once we made the Crow character, I don't think anybody could have convinced Steve to come back as that character, Surfer Sting.
Fun question here from Jeff Pierce. Had Sting wound up as the third man, what would his look have looked like?
I don't know. That's a hypothetical. We didn't get there, so there's no way of knowing. I mean, at that time, he had already started to evolve. I would guess, since it's a hypothetical question, he would have stayed relatively similar to the character that we were seeing, in the weeks leading up to that. Jimmy, there would have been remnants of Surfer Sting, but he would have evolved his look.
Jimmy wants to know, you guys are at the height of the Monday Night Wars. Was there any concern about Sting jumping ship in this era?
None whatsoever. I mean, I knew there was, Steve was really honest. I can't say enough good things about him and his integrity. We knew that there were an occasional call or two and some communication going back and forth, but Steve would tell us. And he made it clear he was not interested in leaving. Keep in mind, he had a family, he had young kids, he had a home, he had a business, and he understood if he went to WWE, there was the unknown, there was no guarantees, there was 300 days a year of travel, which he did with a young family. He was not interested in doing. So while it was a constant awareness, I think, on everybody's part, nobody was completely naive to the fact that it could possibly happen. The level of communication that Steve and I had in particular, I was not concerned with that.
Josh wants to know, is it true that Sting had some sort of an injury during this Crow angle, and that's the reason you guys came up with a clever way to let him heal?
Absolutely not. There was no injury. There was no other reason than we love this character. We love the mystique. Look, one of the things that I learned, and I learned so much, 96, 97, 98, I probably learned more between 96 and 98, 99 than I did in all the years leading up to my whatever experience I had in the business at that point. And one of the things that I knew, two things that I just believed in and still do to this day passionately, is story, anticipation, reality, surprise, and action. I believe you have to have those five elements. I mean, I believe that any good wrestling story, just like any movie, just like any TV show, just like any book, has to have a beginning and a middle and an end, and it has to be believable. There has to be structure. In order for a story to be a good story, there has to be structure to it. And it has to follow a certain formula in order to get the audience to engage. I believe that more now than I ever have. But I believe just as much that the real key to getting a storyline hot or an angle hot is to get people asking questions. If you can get them to ask themselves, sometimes it's subconsciously, sometimes it's, water cooler talk or in an office or whatever. But if you can get people to have a conversation that sounds something like, "Hey, Conrad, did you watch Nitro last night?" "Yeah." What was going on what's with the Sting and the bat, and why is he doing what he's doing? Is, if you can get people to ask those questions and to engage in the product by asking questions, you've got them. And that was really the driver in that whole Crow angle. Everything we did was, what's he thinking? What's he going to do next? When's he going to show up? Whose side is he really on? That was the essence of why, in my opinion, one of the big reasons why that storyline worked so much, because we created more questions than answers.
Fun question here from Johnny. We all know how fond you are of the Raven gimmick. Initially, did you have a hard time adjusting to the Crow Sting character?
No, two different characters. There's no similarity whatsoever. And with all due respect to Raven, the Sting story had a premise. There was a reason. There was betrayal. There was disappointment. There was a reason for him to be that dark, brooding character. And it wasn't just a miserable, depressed guy. There was a reason for it. And vengeance was, that was the stakes. WCW was at risk and Sting wanted vengeance on the NWO. So it had all of the elements of a great character, whereas Raven was just dark and brooding and miserable for no apparent reason. And that's really the big difference between two otherwise somewhat similar characters.
In fairness, couldn't you have given him a reason to be dark and brooding?
Yeah, in fairness, we probably could have. Yeah, I mean, there's no other way to answer that. I don't want to make any excuses.
Sure.
Looking back at it now, had that been more of a priority, with him and us, it's often up to the characters, the performers themselves to help us get to that point. I didn't hear anything from Raven to help us get there. In fairness to Raven, I certainly didn't come up with anything to help him get there. Raven came to us as that character.
Right.
That was him when he walked through the door. And that was part of the problem, with a lot of the stuff that we did. It's not the talent's fault necessarily, but when you walk in with a character that isn't explained or well-defined, or nobody really understands why you are the way you are, other than some of the promos that you're doing, and quite frankly, some of Raven's promos were kind of hard to follow. He understood where he was coming from and what the motivation was, but it didn't translate necessarily all that well with the vast majority of the audience. Some of them got it. Some of them love that character. A lot of people do. People bust my balls on Twitter, all day long, because they love Raven's character. And I get that. I appreciate that. And I appreciate what Raven put into his character. But your question was, in fairness, could we have done a better job? And the answer to that is yes, we could have.
What's funny is actually, Raven's at Starrcast. And so I talked to him and he said, "Hey, did you and Eric talk about me the other day on the show?" And I said, "Yes, we did." He said, "Yeah, I thought that was you." He said, "I couldn't tell cause it was a shitty recording, but I thought it was your voice." And Eric said something like I was a miserable fuck or something like that. And I was like, "Yeah, something like that." And he said, he was right. I just thought, well, okay. He's like, "No, you got to own it, man. When people, some of the things people say, you got to take, stock and be self-aware." Nah, he was right. That was true. So there you go. So if you're a Raven defender, ask Raven. He's on board with Eric here a little bit. Jeremy wants to know, and I've heard a lot of the guys joke about this, but this is a real question. How many of the other wrestlers were mad and or jealous that Sting wasn't booked for any matches for a whole year?
Nobody said anything, but I imagine there were quite a few people going, "Fuck, I wish I would have got that gig." I mean, it was a sweet gig.
No doubt.
It was a sweet ass gig. The risk on our part was that the buildup was going to be worth not having him, on TVs and house shows as much as we normally would. But, you really, in the big scheme of things, it was a safe bet, and a good bet. But yeah, I can imagine guys that were doing 180, 190, 175 dates a year were going, "God, I want a gig like that. I want that one."
Well, and we want you to tune in next week. We're going to watch the very first Monday Nitro. Get your popcorn ready. This is going to be fun. I can't help myself. We're going to have to talk about Pasta Mania, the Mall of America. It's going to be a good time. Tune in next week. And in between time, we've got bonus content coming your way on Patreon. Check it out right now at patreon.com/83weeks. And as always, you should hit that subscribe button over on Twitch at twitch.tv/83weeks. And Eric, it's time for us to address the elephant in the room. You sort of laid a challenge out there, and I haven't gotten an update in a while. Have we met the threshold? Is your ass getting a tattoo at Starrcast or what?
Unless we have a mad rush to twitch.tv/83weeks and get a mad rush of subscriptions, I don't think so.
How many do we need?
About 200.
All right, folks. How bad do you want to see this? Let's get 200 folks. Go to twitch.tv/83weeks. I need to see Eric Bischoff get a tattoo at Starrcast. Make it happen, man. Go check it out. Twitch.tv/Starrcast. And if you haven't already, go pre-order. If you do it by tonight on the 27th at 8 o'clock, you're automatically entered to win the biggest giveaway ever. We've got round trip airfare to Chicago. We've got 3 nights in a hotel suite. We've got 2 front row tickets to All In, platinum bands for Starrcast, VIP at the after party, every official meet and greet. It's too good to be true. Go check it out right now at FITE.tv/Starrcast. That's FITE.tv/Starrcast. And Eric, you know, we talked about the debate up front. You and RD Reynolds are going toe to toe on the death of WCW. I mean, I know there are other people there, but as we get closer, it does feel like it's you and RD, does it not?
Well, it certainly does on my Twitter feed. That's all I'm getting is people commenting about RD showing up. But I got to say, I give him a lot of credit. You know, at least he's got the balls to show up, unlike, you know, his counterparts. They were all involved in that piece of shit. But, yeah, RD's coming. RD's coming. He's bringing his balls with him, and I'm going to do my best to leave him laying on the stage.
Don't miss it. Go pre-order it right now. FITE.tv/Starrcast.